My billionaire father stood up at my wedding, announced I was disinherited in front of everyone, and called my husband a grease stain. He had no idea what he just did. I heard the knife tap the crystal before I saw him stand. That sound, clean and precise and deliberate. It cut through the string quartet and the low hum of 200 people eating food that cost more per plate than most people's weekly grocery bill. I was at the head table in a dress I had chosen myself at a wedding that had been half taken from me before I'd even finished planning it. And when I heard that sound, I went cold from the neck down. My father was already on his feet. He had the bearing of a man who had never once entered a room without knowing he owned it. 61 years old, gray at the temples, built like the kind of determination that doesn't bend, it just reshapes whatever's around it. His name was Robert Harlow, and he had spent my entire life teaching me that the Harlow name was the most important thing I would ever carry. He lifted his glass. The room went quiet the way rooms only go quiet for certain kinds of men, not politely quiet, obediently quiet. My throat tightened. A toast, he said. He smiled at me across the room, that particular smile, the one that looked like warmth from a distance and felt like a contract clause up close. To my daughter and her, he paused, held the pause exactly long enough. Husband. Cole was sitting at the back of the room, not beside me, at the back, under a hand-lettered placard that read, "Guest, not groom," which my father's events coordinator had placed there 2 days before the ceremony when she reorganized the seating chart without telling me. I had found out an hour before walking down the aisle. There had been no time to fix it. My father had known that. I watched Cole's face from across the room. He was still, the way he was always still. Not tense, not performing calm, just genuinely unhurried. He held his glass without lifting it. I had one hope, my father continued, that Nadia would carry our name forward with someone worthy of it. Someone who understood what this family represents, what it took to build. He looked around the room at the people who nodded because they were paid to nod, or because they owed him something, or because they'd been doing it so long they'd stopped noticing. Instead, she chose a grease stain. The room made a sound, not laughter, something worse. That involuntary exhale of people who are uncomfortable and trying not to show it. Phones came up. I saw at least a dozen screens catch light. As of today, my father said, his voice still perfectly even, Nadia is no longer a Harlow in any way that matters. No inheritance, no trust fund, not one share of anything I have built. He raised the glass higher, to the happy couple. Some people drank. Some people didn't know what to do with their hands. And then Cole stood up, slowly, unhurried, the way he did everything. He buttoned his jacket. He'd worn a dark navy suit, simple, perfectly fitted, no tie, and he faced my father across that enormous, ridiculous room, and he smiled. That smile stopped my breath. It wasn't anger. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't the smile of a man who'd been humiliated in front of 200 strangers and was trying to hold it together. It was patient. It was the smile of a man looking at a clock, knowing exactly what time it was. "Thank you for the toast, Mr. Harlow," Cole said. His voice carried easily without strain. "We don't need it." My father laughed. "Too loud, too fast. You rent a hangar." Cole nodded once. "Best money I spend." Near the windows, a man in a beautifully cut charcoal suit set down his fork. He rose from his chair, just slightly, just enough, and inclined his head toward Cole. A small, deliberate gesture. The kind of gesture you'd offer a superior. My father's eyes tracked to him, and I watched him try to place the face and fail. For just a moment, one flickering instant, something cracked in my father's expression. A hairline fracture. There and gone. "You'll understand my work soon enough, sir," Cole said, still looking at my father. "Everyone does eventually." Then he sat back down, reached under the table and found my hand, squeezed it once, firm and steady. I didn't know what I know now. I didn't know who Cole Haywood actually was. I didn't know what was coming in 6 weeks. I just knew that the squeeze of his hand in mine felt like the first solid thing I'd stood on in years, and I knew that whatever my father had just done, he had done it without understanding what he was swinging at. That was the beginning of the end for Robert Harlow. It just took a while to arrive. My name is Nadia Harlow, or it was. I'm 33 years old and a licensed structural engineer, which means my whole professional life is about understanding where the load-bearing elements actually are, and what looks like a wall versus what actually holds the ceiling up. I've been making that distinction in buildings my whole career. I just took too long to make it about my own family. I grew up in Beaufort, South Carolina, in a house that had 11 bedrooms and a dock and a name. People called it the Harlow House like it was a landmark. My father had built his empire from a single inherited parcel of coastal land in the late 80s, leveraging it into a portfolio of luxury resort properties that now stretched across 2 states. Harlow Coastal Group. If you've stayed at a high-end resort anywhere on the Carolina coast in the last 20 years, there's a reasonable chance my father's name is on the title somewhere. My mother left when I was 9. I don't know all of it even now. What I know is that there was a settlement, a non-disclosure agreement, and a handwritten note she left on my dresser that said she was sorry, and that I was the best thing she'd ever done, and that she hoped I would find my way to happiness by a road she hadn't been strong enough to show me. I didn't see her again until I was 26. By then she lived in Portland and had remarried and had 2 sons I'd never met. We have a relationship now, a careful one, but that's a different story. After she left, it was my father and my sister Petra and me. Petra is 4 years younger than I am. She has our father's gift for reading rooms and positioning herself favorably within them. She is very good at being loved by the right people. I always admired that about her and was never quite sure if I envied it. I went to NC State on my own merits. I'd wanted that specifically, to to earn something that had my name on it and not his, and graduated near the top of my structural engineering class. I went to work for a mid-size firm in Raleigh and did good work. My father tolerated this phase of independence the way a man tolerates a child's tantrum, with the patient certainty that it would end and things would return to the natural order. The natural order, as he saw it, was this: I would eventually marry someone from his world, someone with a last name that opened doors, someone whose family and our family could build something together. He'd had someone in mind for years. His name was Preston Devereaux, third-generation Carolina real estate, and my father talked about him the way he talked about a good piece of land, assessed, valued, and already allocated. I was not interested in Preston Devereaux. I never had been. But in my family, disinterest was a phase you were expected to grow out of. I met Cole on a Tuesday morning in early October, 2 years before our wedding. My firm had been contracted to assess a decommissioned military hangar at a small airfield outside of Goldsboro. Old structure, complicated history. A client who wanted to know if the bones were worth saving or if the whole thing needed to come down. I spent 3 hours in there with a flashlight and my notes, crawling the trusses, checking every weld I could get eyes on. When I came back down, a man in coveralls was watching me from near the main doors. He had the look of someone who'd been around that building long enough to have opinions about it. That plate on the eastern truss, he said. No introduction, no preamble. It's been lying to inspectors for about a decade. I looked at him. Show me what you see, he said. I went back up. I showed him what I saw. He told me what he saw. He was right twice and wrong once. And when I pointed out the once, he said, "You're right. I was off," without any of the flinching or repositioning that men sometimes do when a woman corrects their technical assessment. Just, "You're right. I was off." We talked for 2 hours in that hangar. I don't know when the conversation stopped being about the building and started being about everything else. But at some point, he asked me what I would build if nobody was paying me and nobody was watching. Not what I could build. What I would build. What I actually wanted to make. Nobody in my family had ever asked me that. My father asked what something would be worth. My colleagues asked if something could be done. Cole asked what I wanted to make. His name was Cole Haywood. He said he was a mechanic who rented hangar space at the field. He paid for the assessment in cash. He steered us toward a diner 2 miles up the road. Cracked vinyl booths, coffee that came in mugs that had seen better years, instead of the nicer place I'd noticed on the way in. I ordered the chicken sandwich. He ordered pie and ate it seriously, like it deserved his full attention. I noticed 2 things I filed away without meaning to. First, the pilots at the field had nodded to him in that particular way. Not the easy nod of colleagues, but the slightly too careful nod of people who know they're talking to someone above them and are trying not to seem like they know it. Second, when he paid the check, I caught the corner of a card in his wallet that wasn't a credit card and wasn't a mechanic's loyalty card, and he closed the wallet before I could read it. I filed both things away. I didn't ask. We saw each other 5 more times before he kissed me. Each time at the airfield or the diner, or once on a walk along the creek behind the field where the light came through the willows and slats and everything smelled like moving water. He never pushed. He never performed. He just kept being exactly what he'd been in the hangar. Direct, curious, genuinely interested in what I thought about things. He proposed 4 months later. In the hangar, which had by then been assessed and cleared, and was waiting for its renovation. No box from a jeweler's. He'd machined the band himself on a lathe in his workshop. Titanium. Simple. With a slightly imperfect seam where the join was. "I can't give you the life they planned for you," he said, "but I will never make you small." I said yes before he finished the sentence. My father had me investigated before I told him Cole's last name. I don't know exactly when he commissioned it, but I know that 3 days after I called him to say I was engaged, I was summoned to the executive floor of the flagship Harlow Resort in Hilton Head. His assistant had called my phone. Not him. His assistant. He had a folder on the desk when I arrived. Slim, cream-colored. He opened it without looking up. "Cole Haywood," he said. 38 years old. Rents a hangar space at a regional airfield in Wayne County. Drives a 12-year-old truck. No real estate, no portfolio, no family connections worth the ink. He closed the folder. "This is what you're walking away from everything for. He's a good man," I said. "Good men don't build legacies. They get hired by the men who do." He leaned back in his chair. "Harlows don't marry mechanics, Nadia." He said it the way he'd have said it about a zoning law. Not mean exactly. Just factual. As if the world had an operating structure, and he was simply pointing out where things went. I told him I was marrying Cole regardless. He nodded slowly. The way he nodded when a deal was going somewhere he hadn't anticipated and he was already recalculating. "Then you should understand what that means," he said, practically. I found out what it meant practically over the next 2 weeks. My credit cards, the ones tied to the family accounts, declined simultaneously on a Thursday afternoon. I was at a gas station outside Raleigh and had to call my bank to understand what had happened. They explained that the primary account holder had closed my access. The primary account holder. That was my father's phrase. I was sure of it. Not my daughter. The primary account holder. The stipend he'd been depositing into my account since I graduated, $1,200 a month, which I'd always thought of as a safety net but now understood had been a leash. Stopped. No notice. Just gone. My phone started getting texts from people I'd known my whole life. "So sorry, Nadia. Daddy does business with your father. Can't really, you know how it is." I received 11 of those messages in 4 days. 11 people who had come to my birthday parties, who had known me since I was in braids and patent leather shoes, who had eaten at our table Cole dozens of times and who evaporated when the man who signed the checks stopped endorsing me. 28 years of my life, reduced to 11 apologetic texts. I sat with that for a night, one night. Then I opened a spreadsheet and did what engineers do when the ground shifts. I assessed the load, what I earned, what I owed, what the math looked like without the net. It was tight. There was a month, maybe 6 weeks, where it was genuinely scary. But the math held. Cole and I moved into a small clapboard house near the airfield. White paint, blue shutters, a porch that needed 2 boards replaced and had great light in the evenings. I loved it more than any room I had grown up in. I loved it because it was ours and because nothing in it had been chosen for me by someone else. But Cole still didn't add up. He never said it directly. That was the thing. He didn't lie exactly. He just existed at the edge of the frame in a way that left questions. I'd come home and he'd be on the porch, voice low on the phone. Don't loop in legal yet. I'll handle the board. A mechanic doesn't have a board. A man who rents a hangar doesn't handle boards. Sometimes cars I didn't recognize would be parked outside. Professional vehicles. Not dealership new, but not old either. The people who got out of them wore clothes that fit too well for the county. They'd go into the shop and be in there for an hour, and when they came out, they didn't look like customers who'd just had an oil change. I filed it. All of it. I didn't ask because some part of me understood, without being able to name it yet, that the answer would come when it was ready to come and not before. My father planned our wedding the way he planned hostile acquisitions. We had arranged a small ceremony. 40 people. The airfield's renovated hangar. Cole had been granted use of the space by the owner, which I'd thought was a generous professional favor. A justice of the peace. A dinner after at the diner where we'd had our first real conversation. Expanded for the occasion with tables and decent wine. My father sent an RSVP for himself and a guest. I hadn't invited him, but I hadn't told him not to come. I should have. I knew my father, and I still didn't see it. 200 people arrived. He had sent invitations, his own invitations on Harlow Group letterhead, to every person in his professional and social world within driving distance of the Outer Banks. He had rented a venue coordinator, a florist, a string quartet, a caterer. He had replaced my 40-person dinner with a 200-person event at a resort space he owned 15 minutes from the airfield. The hangar ceremony happened, that part, at least. But the reception had been colonized. Cole had been assigned a table at the back of the room under a hand-lettered placard, guest, not groom. I found out about the seating chart from my sister Petra, who had seen it during setup and texted me a photo at 11:47 the morning of. I was already in hair and makeup. The ceremony was at 2. There was nothing I could do in 2 hours that wouldn't become a public scene and hand my father exactly the narrative he wanted, that I was unstable, that this was chaos, that I was in over my head. So I walked down the aisle. I said my vows to Cole in the hangar, under the trusses we'd argued about 3 years earlier, while my father sat in the 3rd row with Preston Devereaux beside him like an unused option he still hadn't fully let expire. The ceremony was ours. 20 minutes of exactly what we'd meant to have. The reception was his. I'd noticed the older man near the windows during the cocktail hour. He arrived alone, declined the champagne when the server offered it, and spent most of the early part of the evening standing near the perimeter of the room in that particular way that men with genuine authority sometimes stand. Not working the room, just watching it. His suit was charcoal, beautifully cut, the kind of tailoring that doesn't call attention to itself because it doesn't need to. He was perhaps 70, silver hair, trimmed close. He had the posture of someone who had spent a great deal of his life on planes and had learned to carry himself well in any room he landed in. He'd spoken to Cole briefly during cocktail hour. I had seen it from across the room. Cole's face opening into genuine warmth. That particular warmth he reserved for people he actually respected, not the pleasant professional warmth he used for everyone else. They'd spoken for perhaps 3 minutes. Then the man had moved away, and Cole had come to find me, and I'd forgotten about it in the chaos of the seating disaster. I found out later that his name was Everett Parrish. I found out later what that name meant, but I'm getting ahead of the story. After my father's toast, after the knife on the crystal, after the grease stain, after the disinheritance announced to 200 people with phones out, there was a moment of suspended quiet in that room that felt like the entire building holding its breath, and then Cole stood up. I have thought about that moment many times in the years since. The particular quality of how he moved, not rushed, not performing confidence, just present. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at my father the way you look at a problem you've already solved and are watching catch up to its own conclusion. My father laughed after Cole's response. Too loud, too fast. A fraction of a second off the beat of real amusement. You rent a hangar, my father said again. Best money I spend, Cole said. Just that. He sat down. He took my hand under the table and squeezed it. I looked at his face and saw something I hadn't seen in him before. Or maybe something I'd seen but hadn't named. There was a quality in his expression, in the set of his jaw, in the stillness behind his eyes, that was not patience. It was something you could mistake for patience until you understood the difference. It was a countdown. I spent the rest of that evening in a controlled kind of freefall, smiling at people I didn't know, thanking them for coming to an event I hadn't thrown, eating food I hadn't ordered. My father held court on the far side of the room for 3 hours, and several people came to me with versions of the same speech. I'm sorry, Nadia, you know how he is. He just wants what's best. He'll come around. I nodded each time. I did not say what I was thinking. We left at 10, drove home in Cole's truck with the windows down and the spring air air coming in thick and warm off the fields. I took my shoes off and put my feet on the dashboard. Neither of us spoke for the first 20 minutes. Then Cole said, "How are you?" "I don't know yet," I said. "How are you?" He was quiet for a moment. "I've been waiting a long time for this to be over," he said. I looked at him. For what to be over? He kept his eyes on the road. "I'll tell you the whole thing in a few weeks, when I can." "Cole." "I know," he said. "I know. I'm asking you to trust me for a little longer." I had trusted him for 3 years. I had married him that afternoon. I had watched him stand up in a room full of strangers and face my father with the calm of someone who knew something the rest of us didn't. "Okay," I said. I stared out at the dark fields. "But when it's over," I said, "you tell me everything." "Everything," he said. 3 weeks later, I found a folder in the filing cabinet in Cole's office. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that, not because it changes anything, but because it's true. I was looking for the warranty documentation on the washing machine, which had developed a noise and whose paperwork Cole had said was in the second drawer of the filing cabinet in his office. The second drawer. I opened it and immediately saw that it was not the right drawer. Wrong contents, wrong folders, and as I started to close it, my eye caught a name on a tab, Harlow Coastal Group. I stood there in Cole's office for a moment, then I pulled the folder. It was not a short folder. Inside were documents, corporate filings, correspondence, financial projections, an organizational chart, meeting minutes. The meeting minutes were from a board of directors, not a homeowners association, not a mechanics union, a corporate board of directors. The letterhead at the top of the minutes read, Haywood Aviation Holdings, LLC. I sat down on the floor of Cole's office and read for 40 minutes. Cole Haywood was not an aircraft mechanic. He was the founder and primary shareholder of Haywood Aviation Holdings, a private aviation infrastructure company operating across 14 states. They built and managed private airfields, FBOs, maintenance facilities, and aviation technology systems for high-net-worth clients and regional operators. They had been in operation for 11 years. The company's last assessed valuation, per a document dated 8 months prior, was $240 million. The hangar wasn't rented space. He owned the field. He owned 3 fields. He'd been expanding into a 4th when we met. The board correspondence in the folder included a proposal, dated 14 months before our first conversation, from Harlow Coastal Group, my father's company. The proposal was for a joint venture. My father had identified a gap in the luxury coastal resort market, private aviation access, high-end clients who wanted to fly in and out without commercial airport friction. He'd spent 2 years trying to find the right infrastructure partner. He'd landed on Haywood Aviation Holdings as the obvious candidate. He'd sent a proposal to Cole personally. Cole had declined it. The letter was 2 paragraphs: professional, courteous, definitive. Mr. Harlow, thank you for your interest in a partnership with HAH. After careful consideration, we do not believe this arrangement aligns with our strategic objectives at this time. We wish Harlow Coastal Group continued success. 14 months before Cole came to assess my firm's work at the Goldsboro hangar, I read that letter 3 times. I sat on the floor of my husband's office and felt the architecture of the last 3 years rearrange itself around me. Not collapse, rearrange, like an optical illusion snapping into focus. Cole had known who my father was before he ever met me. He hadn't known who I was. I was sure of that. I had to be sure of it. And everything I'd seen in 3 years told me it was true. I was Nadia, who worked for the structural engineering firm. I was the woman in the trusses with the flashlight, the one who argued back and was right and wrong and admitted the once. But he had known the name. When I called him into the office that night, he was in the kitchen, making dinner, something with garlic that smelled extraordinary, and I held up the Harlow Coastal Group folder. He turned off the burner and sat down at the kitchen table and told me everything without me having to ask a second time. His real name, his full name, was Coleman Haywood Parrish. Everett Parrish, the man at our wedding who had risen from his chair and inclined his head like a salute, was his uncle, his mother's brother. The man who had started the original aviation maintenance company that Cole had taken over at 26, restructured, and built into Haywood Aviation Holdings over the following decade. He had lived quietly. That was deliberate. The truck, the coveralls, the diner, the titanium ring machined on a lathe, not performance. He genuinely preferred it. He'd been raised by people who believed that the loudest thing in the room was rarely the most important thing in the room, and it had shaped how he moved through the world. He had been at the Goldsboro airfield that morning because the assessment my firm was doing was on a property he was considering acquiring. He hadn't known which engineer would be sent. He'd expected to shake a hand, hear a report, and leave. Instead, he'd watched a woman go up into the trusses with a flashlight and argue with him about a load plate and be exactly right. And he'd thought, without planning to, what would you build if nobody was watching? He'd declined my father's partnership offer because he'd done his research and knew exactly what working with Robert Harlow looked like. The man had a pattern: approach smaller operators, structure deals with favorable terms that slowly shifted, leverage the resort brand to crowd out the partner's own negotiating position until the partner was functionally an employee of the Harlow operation, rather than an equal. 3 different operators had gone through that cycle in the preceding decade. Cole didn't want any part of it. What he hadn't planned was meeting me, and what he hadn't told me until that night at the kitchen table was that 6 weeks after our wedding, he had a scheduled meeting. A meeting that had been arranged before we'd even gotten engaged, with a consortium of investors who were putting together the largest private aviation development in the Southeast. A project that would require acquire, among other things, coastal infrastructure access. Harlow Coastal Group had submitted a proposal to be considered as a potential real estate partner in that consortium. Robert Harlow was going to be in that room. Cole was going to be the one deciding whether he got a seat at the table. He had known this since before the wedding. He had known it during the toast. He had known it when my father called him a grease stain in front of 200 people with phones out. He had known it when he squeezed my hand under the table. That was the countdown. The meeting was in Charlotte, 6 weeks after our wedding, a private conference facility in Uptown, the kind of place with no visible signage from the street and a check-in process that ran on prior arrangement only. I know this because I was there, not in the room, not the main session, but in the building, in the anteroom where the principal's guests waited, because Cole had asked me to come and I'd said yes, without fully understanding why until I was sitting there. He went in at 9 in the morning in a navy suit, same shade as the wedding I noticed, and a white shirt and no tie. He was carrying a single portfolio. He didn't look like a man walking into the most important meeting of his business life. He looked like a man going to check on something he'd already handled. My father arrived at 9:20. I saw him from the anteroom window. He came in a town car. He was dressed in his full register, dark suit, pocket square, the Harlow Group pin he wore on every professional occasion. He looked like money moving through a space, confident and continuous. He did not see me. I sat with my coffee and waited. The meeting ran until 12:40. Cole came out first. He found me in the anteroom, sat down, loosened his collar. He didn't say anything right away. I waited. He's not getting the deal, Cole said. Did you do that, or did the numbers do it? Cole looked at me. The numbers did it. His proposal had favorable structure for Harlow Group and unfavorable structure for everyone else in the consortium. The other principals saw it. I just didn't talk them out of seeing it. He paused. I did let it go longer than I could have, he said. I wanted him to make the case himself, so the record was clear. And is it clear? Very clear, he said. My father came out of the main conference room at 12:55. He was still composed. The composure of a man who hadn't absorbed the full meaning of what had just happened yet, who was still running on the momentum of expecting a certain outcome. He walked into the anteroom. He saw me. He stopped. He looked at Cole. Something moved across his face. Not the hairline fracture from the wedding. Something bigger. A plate shifting. Nadia, he said. His voice had changed slightly. Something careful in it now. I stood up. Cole stood beside me. You knew, my father said. Not to me. To Cole. I knew who you were, Cole said. Before I met Nadia, I'd already declined your partnership. What I didn't know was anything about her. My father looked at him for a long moment. I watched him think. I watched him cycle through the angles. Watched him arrive at the one that mattered. The aviation consortium, he said. Yes, Cole said. You were always going to be in that room. Yes. My father turned to me then. His face had done something I'd never quite seen it do. The certainty was gone. Not the anger. That was still there, under everything. But the certainty. That particular bedrock quality that had never once wavered in 61 years of making the world conform to his requirements. Nadia, he said again, like a question this time. You called my husband a grease stain, I said, in front of 200 people, at our wedding. You announced to the room that I was nothing, that I'd chosen wrong, that I'd thrown away everything that mattered. I kept my voice level. I'd had 6 weeks to figure out what I needed to say, and I wanted to say it cleanly. You thought you were erasing me. You've been trying to erase me for years. Every time I did something on my own terms, every job, every decision, every dollar I earned without your name on it, you treated it like a phase you were waiting out. I took one step toward him. I'm not a phase, Dad. I never was. He didn't speak. He was still the most powerful man in any room he entered, and he was standing in this one and finding out that it wasn't true anymore. I don't want the inheritance, I said. I never needed it. I just needed you to see me, and you couldn't do that. So, Cole said nothing. He stood slightly behind me and slightly to the side, the way he always positioned himself, present, not crowding, letting me have exactly the space I needed. My father left without speaking. The aftermath wasn't clean. I want to be honest about that. He called Petra the night he got back from Charlotte. I know because Petra called me the next morning, and she wasn't calling with an update. She was calling to tell me that she'd refused to do what he'd asked her to do, which was to reach out to Cole's board contacts and suggest that Cole had a conflict of interest in the consortium deal. My father had spent a night processing his humiliation and arrived at the conclusion that the thing to do was to attack the structure of what Cole had built. Petra had said no. She told me on the phone that she'd said, Dad, she's my sister. She'll always be my sister. You can't ask me to do this. And then she'd hung up. I cried for 20 minutes after that call. Not grief, exactly. Relief. The kind of relief that comes when you realize something you'd been afraid to test has held. She came to visit us 2 weekends later. She met Cole on his own terms, in the kitchen, eating pie, talking about something she'd read in the news, and I watched her recalibrate in real time. She drove home Sunday afternoon and called me from the road. He's remarkable, she said. He's so quiet and so completely sure of everything. I told her I knew. My father attempted 3 other approaches over the following months. He filed a complaint with the consortium about the bid process, alleging an undisclosed conflict of interest. The consortium's legal team reviewed it and found no basis. Cole had disclosed his family connection to the group's founder before the process began. It was in the initial filing, which my father apparently hadn't read carefully because he'd assumed Cole Haywood was what he looked like. He contacted the firm I worked for. This one I found out about through my project manager, who called me into his office with a slightly uncomfortable expression and said, I want you to know I received a call from Robert Harlow's office suggesting that your continued employment here might create complications with a potential Harlow Group contract. I want you to know we told them we weren't interested in that conversation. He paused. And we're not interested in the contract either. I bought him a coffee the next morning. Best coffee I ever paid for. The third approach was the one that hurt the most. Not because it worked, but because of where it came from. He called my mother. I don't know how he got her number. I don't know what he said to her exactly. What I know is that she called me in tears on a Wednesday night, apologizing for something she hadn't done. And I spent an hour reassuring her that whatever he'd said was not her responsibility to manage. She was frightened of him still. Even after 24 years, he still had that particular gravity. I called him the next day. I said, "Don't contact my mother. Don't contact my employer. Don't contact anyone in my life again without going through me first." I said it the way I'd say a load specification. Exact weight, exact tolerance, no room for interpretation. He was quiet for a moment. "You're very much like me," he said. "No," I said. "I'm not. That's the whole point." I hung up. We haven't spoken since. That call was 14 months ago. It is the longest we've gone without contact in my entire life, and I won't pretend it doesn't carry weight. He is my father. He gave me things I don't have words for. A ferocity about craftsmanship, a bone-deep belief that you should know your work well enough to defend every decision you made. I use those things every day. They are genuinely mine. What he could not give me was the thing that mattered most. The space to be something he hadn't designed. Cole and I are in Raleigh now. We bought a house 2 years ago. 4 bedrooms, a workshop for Cole, a study for me with enough natural light to work by. We replaced the porch boards from the old clapboard house and brought them with us. They're in the workshop. Cole keeps saying he'll make something from them eventually. I believe him. The consortium deal closed. Haywood Aviation Holdings is the infrastructure backbone for what is now the largest private aviation network on the East Coast. Cole is in meetings that would have stunned my father, not because of their scale, but because of who's in them and because of who's running them. My name is Nadia Haywood now. I chose it. Not because I was required to, not because it was expected, but because it felt like the right load-bearing element, the one that actually holds. I think about my father more than I expected to. I think about the version of him I needed, the one who would have come to a 40-person ceremony at an airfield and eaten bad catering and met Cole over cracked vinyl and realized over 2 hours that his daughter had found something real. That version of my father would have been late to see it, would have been resistant, would have needed convincing, but he would have gotten there. He just couldn't get there. That's the part I'm still learning to set down. What I know, finally and completely, is this. He stood up at my wedding and announced that I was nothing. And he was wrong, but not in the way he found out about in Charlotte. He was wrong long before Charlotte. He was wrong the moment he looked at the person I'd chosen and saw only the coveralls. He thought the grease stain was the man. He couldn't see that the grease stain was the proof, that Cole worked on things with his hands, that he knew the mechanical truth of how things functioned, that he could look at a load plate that had been lying to inspectors for a decade and see exactly what was wrong and say so without preamble. That's who I married. A man who sees the actual load-bearing elements. A man who told me I could build whatever I wanted to build and meant it structurally, meant it in the bones. My father stood up at my wedding to take everything from me. He had no idea what he was looking at. He still doesn't. And I have stopped waiting for him to see it.